Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me in this panel. It's also my first time at CRIM, so I also love it so far, so good. So this is going to be a change of topic and approach to what we have been hearing since this morning. If you have attended also the previous session on the green transition, just transition debate. So I'm going to take you to another area of this debate, which is to look at what people think about these green transition policies, just transition policies, however you measure it, and to understand what kind of individual characteristics determine or impact these kind of policy preferences that you have been talking about since this morning. So, and I will be focusing on the European case. So I have it's an empirical work, and it's an ongoing. It's a work in progress. So feedback is much appreciated. Um, so the I don't think I have to motivate you with all the big challenges that that is the planetary boundaries that we are passing and so on. But as I said, the approach so far has been on the let's say the top down, looking at things from the top down. You know, we make policies and then everything will be fine. We will not no longer be crossing those boundaries. But then, how do people experience those top down policies? So it's to in a way to look at it from bottom up to understand the individual experiences during those transitions, which are challenging and difficult, because understanding these challenges from the people's perspective will help us better target our policies, take into account certain vulnerabilities. Speaking of which, I will do a little quick self promotion here. I've brought here a few copies of our policy brief, which is about the vulnerable groups who are, and their challenges experienced during the green transition and just transition in particular. So if you're interested, have a copy, feel free. So to be able to better understand those vulnerabilities, I think we need to look at individuals' preferences as well. So it's a complementary approach to what we've been hearing so far. Um, so when I first look at this topic, which so I'm a labor economist, I like quantitative stuff, data stuff. I thought this was a little bit missing in this more conceptual and theoretical field. But I also realized that there is indeed a growing interest in trying to quantify and measure some of these things, and it's a growing literature. So there is a literature on eco-social policies. So it's a combination of ecological and social policies that integrate these two things together. And then there is this increasingly availability of data sets which measure people's preferences about some or part of these policies. So it's a construct. It's a construction, data construction in a way, because there's no data that asks, there's no survey that asks people what is your preference about just transition policies. So you need to go there, understand what kind of questions are there on the ecological front and on the social front, and then you need to sort of construct eco-social policy preference. So this is a contribution in that respect. What I will be presenting you here. So here are my simple three research questions. So what are the determining factors of individuals' ecological behavior? So I will come to this when I will show you the methodological aspect, because to get to the eco-social policy preferences, I have to first understand ecological behavior, then social policy preferences, and then I'll combine the two to come up with an eco-social policy preference. But that's coming in the next slides. So as I said, trying to understand what factors um, of people could be their gender, age, education, occupation, and income, etc., determine their preferences about this kind of social, ecological, and eco-social policies. So that's the questions. And in particular, I will be looking at the following factors. I will be investigating their empirical importance and significance in the questions that I asked a second ago. And these factors are social demographic characteristics, so gender, age, educational attainment, household characteristics, area of residence, whether you live in a rural area or an urban area might have an impact about how you feel about these policies. Labor market indicators, so your job status, employment status, occupation income. Political preferences, which I think is very important also, whether you are voting right wing, left wing, could also be correlated with some of your policy preferences. An additional variable that I haven't seen in the literature at least, and I'm happy to add this aspect, is a trade union membership. So because just transition is a topic of the heart of trade unions as well, so I'm also investigating whether that explains some of these policy preferences. And then these are the last ones are additional behavioral factors, and those include whether you care about the environment or whether you are worried about climate change. So these more general feelings about climate change or environmental degradation. And last but not least, also whether you are willing to decrease inequalities in the society. So more a general social question. So these are also part of the factors that might explain, and that's to be tested empirically. So the data sources that I'm using is this um, is based on the European Social Survey. So it's a biannual repeated cross-section survey from 2002 to 2024. The last wave is coming out. It covers more than 30 countries, mainly in Europe and in the neighborhood. But round 8, so that's from 2016-17, it's done over 2 years, is a special module that asks questions on public attitudes to climate change, energy security, and energy preferences, as well as attitudes about welfare state, social policies, if you want. So in that round, 23 countries participated. And I focus on 21 countries because I only take the EU and the EFTA countries, which include Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. And respondents to this survey are all individuals aged 15 and above, and they reside in private households and in one of those countries, regardless of their nationality, language they spoke, or legal status. Okay? So everyone. It's a representative data. Um, how am I with the time? Maybe. Okay, so we can go over these details, but I thought it would be more interesting also to show you the results. But the results are based on this empirical specification, which is a reduced form equation that try to describe the dependent variable, which is eventually the eco-social policy preference that will be measured on a scale. And then all those right-hand side variables are the variables that I listed before: social demographic characteristics, educational attainment, labor market variables, and so on. And this is going to be, I tried several methods, but I decided to show you the results with the simplest OLS, linear probability model. And all analyses are weighted, so it's representative within the country, but also across countries because it's a harmonized data set. So now the interesting part here is I already gave a bit of a hint on that in the beginning, is the dependent variable. So how do you measure eco-social policy preferences? So I do this in 4 steps. So first, there's the ecological behavior. So this is measured in the data through 2 questions. At least I use 2 of those, which are most relevant to ecological behavior of an individual. So people are asked, what is your how likely are you to buy the most energy efficient household appliance? And second, are you ready to limit your own energy use to reduce climate change? So these are ecological, that's how I categorize them, ecological behavior. Okay. The second one is ecological policy preference. So this is a different thing. And that is the question that asks people, would you be ready to support increase in the taxes in fossil fuel? Would you be ready to pay more tax on fossil fuel? Second, would you be supportive of increasing subsidies on renewable energy sources? And third, would you be okay to would you support the idea of banning the least efficient household appliances? Again, something that goes along the lines of, decreasing our footprint and so on. So this is the ecological policy preferences. The third is the social policy preferences. So here I call it welfare policy. I know it's not the same, but at least in terms of the data, it's in the welfare policy module. And this is asking people whether they believe, whether the individual believes that it's government's responsibility to ensure standard of living of the elderly. So this is old age, let's say, taking care of old people, unemployed, so unemployment benefit if you want, and childcare. So I look at the welfare provisions in 3 dimensions: elderly care, childcare, and unemployment. And last but not least, because this is the most important part, how do I measure eco-social policy preference? Because as I said, in the survey, there's no such a question. So you need to construct this based on ecological, at least that's how we did it. We combined the second and the third question in the simplest way possible, the average. So there could be other ways of doing it. That's part of the robustness checks that I will be doing later on. But I simply took the average of 2 and 3, ecological policy preference and welfare policy preference, to summarize it as eco-social policy preferences. Because if you remember, eco-social policy has to tick the box of social policy, but also ecological policy. So it has to integrate the two. But as I said, this is not in the data as such, so you need to construct it. And that's what we did here. And all the variables are normalized, so it's on a scale. So all these questions are asked on a scale, and then I normalize them between 0 and 1, so that when it is higher, you are more likely to support it, and when it's lower, you are against it. Okay. So the results, and how much time do I have left? Because I think I'm going to go to the summary. Okay, then let me go to the summary, because I don't like these graphs. I didn't have time to make them more beautiful for you. But last night I did this, and I hope with my jet lag mind I didn't screw up the signs. But I think this is probably correct. So this is the 4 dependent variables that I described, the way I measured them, and on the list on the left is the individual factors that I was investigating their importance on those dependent variables. Okay, so positive is it means that female, for example. Let's look at the first row. So women are more supportive of they are more likely to have ecological behavior. Let's say in terms of, if you remember, they are more likely to use household appliances that are less polluting. They are more in favor of ecological policies, more in favor of social policies, and more in favor of eco-social policies. So there's clearly a gender gap or difference there. Let me put it this way. And when there's a star, it means that it's significant. So the data is showing a significant difference. And then we can pick and choose. For example, voting preferences. So so the voting preferences, so it's a subjective variable. The higher is the voting variable. Voting is the higher values indicate right wing, lower values indicate left wing. And in the graphs here, if you see, for example, so placement on the left-right scale, that's the voting, so it's on the left-hand side. So how do we read that? It means that the more right-wing you vote, the more, where is the right wing? Okay, the less likely you are to support eco-social policies. So that's the last, so voting right, the last column, and that's a significant one. I pick another one, trade union membership. So if you are, if the respondent is a trade union member, it has a positive association with all the dependent variables. So trade union members are more likely to support social policies, significantly so, and they're also more likely to support eco-social policies. Okay, that's also a significant one. And I think time is more or less up. So yeah, this is, as I said, an ongoing work, and it's not a paper yet. So it's going to become a paper in the coming months. But I think how different socioeconomic demographic characteristics are impacting those different variables differently, and sometimes in opposing directions. And so we'll have to a little bit understand why we see what we see, and also operationalize this eco-social policy preference measure a bit, probably more in different ways as well, because I only took the average so far. There could be other ways, maybe weighted average, or other more complex formulations could be thought. This is something that I'm thinking about, and it will be materialized and operationalized in the coming months. And I would also like to increase the period, because as I said, this is the round 8 of European Social Survey, so it's 2016-17. It's not that old, but it's not too recent either. So I'm trying to think of ways of using the whole European Social Survey, if you want the whole range of years. But there, the problem I run into is that these questions, this module, the special module, is not asking. It was asking certain questions on climate change and stuff, and that's not in every round. But there are other variables that might be a good proxy, and that's something that I have to think about later on. So yeah, I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.